The auctioneer raised his gavel. His voice was the kind of practiced, frictionless baritone that could sell a thing you didn't want for a price you couldn't afford. It moved through the stale air of the county courthouse annex room, a place that smelled of old paper and quiet desperation. He said, "Going once?" The developer's man seated in the front row straightened his tie. He had the easy confidence of someone playing with house money. The other bidders, mostly local farmers and a few small-time investors, had already folded their hands, their faces set in the familiar resignation of being outgunned. The room was a study in beige and worn wood, the fluorescent lights overhead humming a low, steady note of bureaucratic indifference. "Going twice." The developer's man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a final confirmation. John Marsh stood in the back near the door, a cardboard tube under his left arm. He had not said a word. He had not moved.
His work boots were clean, but not new. His shirt was pressed. A man prepared, not for a fight, but for a long meeting. He watched the gavel hang in the air for that final, theatrical pause. The auctioneer opened his mouth. "Stop the sale." The words were not loud. They did not carry anger or urgency. They were calm, declarative, and they landed in the quiet room with the weight of a stone. Every head turned. The auctioneer's mouth hung open for a second before closing. He lowered the gavel to the lectern. "I'm sorry?" The developer's man turned in his seat, an expression of mild annoyance on his face. He saw John standing there, a man who looked like he should be fixing a tractor, not interrupting a foreclosure auction. The bank's attorney, a younger man in a suit that was a little too sharp for this town, stood up. His name was Davies. "On what grounds?" Davies' voice was smooth, professional. He was accustomed to protests, to emotional outbursts from families losing their property.
This felt different. John Marsh did not answer him directly. He walked forward, slow, controlled. He moved past the rows of folding chairs, his steps making no sound on the worn linoleum. He reached the heavy oak table at the front of the room, where the attorney and the auctioneer stood. He placed the cardboard tube on the table. He did not open it. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was yellowed with age, brittle at the creases. He unfolded it carefully and laid it flat on the table, smoothing it with the palm of his weathered hand. The auction was for Parcel 7B, a strip of 40 acres running along the old creek bed. The bank, First Fidelity Mutual, had initiated foreclosure proceedings 6 months prior, citing a defaulted balloon payment of $76,000 on a loan taken out in 2005. It was, according to the bank, a simple, straightforward matter. A debt unpaid, a consequence delivered. John Marsh pointed a single finger at a line of faded typewriting on the old document. He spoke again, his voice just as even as before. "The title is not clear. The lien from the original loan was never satisfied." Davies, the bank attorney, picked up the paper. He held it with a certain disdain, as if it were a strange and slightly dirty artifact. He glanced at it, his eyes scanning the text with the practiced speed of a man who reads documents for a living. His expression did not change. He smiled, a thin, professional gesture that did not reach his eyes. He said, "Sir, this appears to be a receipt from a loan that was paid off decades ago. It has no bearing on the current debt, the one from 2005. He placed the paper back on the table, a gentle dismissal. The developer's representative relaxed in his chair, turning back toward the front. The other people in the room, the silent chorus of neighbours and onlookers, shifted, their brief flicker of interest extinguished.
It was just another sad, desperate attempt. They had seen it before. John Marsh did not pick up the paper. He left it on the table. He said, "That loan was from 1976. My father paid it off in 1996. 20 years, right on schedule." He looked directly at Davies. "But the bank made a mistake, a small one." He paused. "They charged him a $4 late fee in August of 1976. He paid it the next month. but your records never credited the payment. So when he made his final payment in 1996, the bank's books showed a balance of $4 plus 20 years of interest and penalties. The loan was never closed. The lien was never released. Davies's smile tightened. He buttoned his jacket. That's a clerical issue, a historical footnote. It doesn't invalidate a subsequent loan taken against the property. The 2005 loan is the matter at hand. The $76,000 debt is real. He spoke with the unshakable certainty of the institution he represented.
An institution that did not make mistakes of this magnitude. An institution that knew the law, that wrote the contracts, that held the deeds. An institution that always won. John Marsh stood his ground. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated a fact. You can't take out a new loan on a property that already has an unresolved lien against it. Not legally. The title wasn't clear in 2005. That loan should never have been approved. The room was quiet again. The developer's man had turned around once more, his posture now rigid. He was no longer looking at John, but at the bank's attorney. He was beginning to understand that this was not a desperate emotional plea. This was a procedural problem. And procedural problems, in the world of deeds and titles, were the most dangerous kind. The auctioneer looked from Davies to John, his professional rhythm broken. He cleared his throat. Mr. Davies? He was asking for guidance, for a return to the script. Davies ignored him.
He was focused on John. He was reassessing the man in the work boots. This was not the simple farmer he had assumed. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. To understand why, you have to go back. Not just 6 months to the first foreclosure notice. Not just to 2005 when the second loan was taken out. You have to go back 28 years to a cold November afternoon in 1996. John's father, a man named Thomas Marsh, sat at the same kitchen table John now owned. He had a shoebox in front of him. In the shoebox were 20 years of canceled checks and bank statements related to the land. The original loan, taken out in 1976, had been for $8,000. A fortune then. It was for the 40 acres along the creek, a piece of land he'd wanted his whole life. He had paid it off that morning. He had walked into the bank, handed over the final cashier's check, and shaken the branch manager's hand. He came home and laid every piece of paper out on the table.
John, then a young man himself, was there. He watched his father work. Thomas Marsh was not an educated man, not in the formal sense. He had left school after the 8th grade, but he understood numbers. More than that, he understood fairness. He believed the world operated on a simple ledger. What you owed, you paid. What you were owed, you collected. Not a penny more, not a penny less. He reconciled the entire 20-year history of the loan that afternoon. He used a pencil and a lined notebook. He added up every payment. He checked it against every statement. And he found it. A discrepancy. It was small, almost invisible, a $4 late charge from the first year of the loan. He remembered it clearly. The harvest had been late. He'd mailed the check 3 days past the due date. The next month's statement showed the $4 fee. He had included it in his next payment. He had the cancelled check to prove it.
But as he looked at the final statement from the bank, he saw that the $4 had never been credited. The interest had been compounding on it, quietly, for 2 decades. The final payment he had made that morning, the amount the bank told him would settle the debt, was technically short. He went back to the bank the next day. He spoke to the same branch manager. He showed him the paperwork. The manager was polite but dismissive. "It's a zero balance, Mr. Marsh. The loan is paid. Don't worry about it. It's just a computer glitch." Thomas Marsh was not a man who trusted computers. He said, "I want a paid-in-full statement and the release of lien filed with the county." The manager promised to take care of it. A week later, A letter arrived. It was a generic form letter stating the loan was paid. It was not the official, notarized satisfaction of mortgage document required for filing with the county recorder. He called again. He was told it was being processed. He called a month later.
He was told it had been sent. He never received it. Life, as it does, moved on. The issue faded. The land was his, free and clear. Or so he thought. He kept the shoebox. It went on a shelf in his workshop next to jars of old nuts and bolts, a box of settled history. Years passed. John's father grew old. In 2005, he needed money for his wife's medical bills. He went to the same bank. He took out a new loan against the land. No one at the bank, no one at the title company flagged the old unreleased lien. They ran a standard title search, and for reasons lost to time and sloppy paperwork, it came back clean. The new loan was issued. The old lien from 1976 sat there, a ghost in the machine, a tiny $4 error sleeping in the county records. Thomas Marsh passed away in 2019, John's mother 2 years later. The land and the second loan passed to John. He managed the payments just as his father had. He was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands. He understood the physical world of wood and steel. The abstract world of finance was foreign territory. He trusted the bank's monthly statements. He paid what they asked. Then, last year, a series of misfortunes. A major client went bankrupt. A back injury laid him up for 2 months. The payments on the 2005 loan fell behind. The letters from the bank started arriving. First polite reminders, then firm demands, then the formal notice of foreclosure. The balloon payment of $76,000 was due, an amount he could not possibly pay. He had prepared himself to lose the land. It was a grief he held quietly, a failure he felt deeply. It was his father's land, a place of memory. He remembered walking the creek bed with him as a boy, learning the names of the trees. He remembered his father on his tractor, cutting hay in the late summer sun. His father had been a man of immense principle. He never took what wasn't his. He never paid for what he didn't owe.
His motto was simple: do the work, check the math. One evening, about 3 weeks before the auction, John was in his father's old workshop. He was cleaning it out, a task he had put off for years. It was too full of memories. He found the shoebox on the shelf. He opened it. He saw the old checks, the brittle statements, the lined notebook with his father's careful handwriting. He sat down on a dusty stool and began to read. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe just a connection to his father, a reminder of his quiet strength. He read through the notebook. He saw the entry his father had made in 1996, the careful calculation, the circled discrepancy. $4. He saw the note his father had written beside it. Bank says not to worry, we'll send release. But there was no release in the box. John felt a flicker of something, a question. He spent the next 2 days at the county courthouse. He learned how to use the microfiche machines.
He pulled the property records for Parcel 7B, going back 50 years. And he found it. Or rather, he found the absence of it. The mortgage from 1976 was there, duly recorded. The lien was there. But there was no corresponding satisfaction of mortgage, no release. According to the official county record, the original $8,000 loan from 1976 was still open. The lien was still attached to the land. He understood then. The bank had built its entire legal case for foreclosure on a foundation of sand. The 2005 loan, the one he had defaulted on, was invalid. It had been secured against a property with a clouded title, a title clouded by the bank's own clerical error from half a century ago. He didn't hire a lawyer. He couldn't afford one. Besides, his father had never trusted them. He said they were paid to make simple things complicated. John believed the truth was simple. It just needed to be shown.
He made a high-quality copy of the 1976 payment record showing the $4 fee.
He found the cancelled check. He put them in his coat pocket. He took his father's old survey map of the property, the one from 1976, and rolled it into the cardboard tube. He was ready. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the money. It was about restoring something crooked to straight. It was about honouring his father's simple rule. Check the math. Back in the auction room, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. The initial annoyance had evaporated, replaced by a grudging curiosity. Mr. Davies, the bank's attorney, had lost his polished composure. He was now leaning over the table, his face close to John's. He tried a new tactic, shifting from legal dismissal to procedural intimidation. He said, "Even if, for the sake of argument, what you're saying is true, it's a matter for the courts. It's a civil dispute. It doesn't give you the right to disrupt a lawful public auction."
The sale will proceed. We will deal with your claim later.
He was trying to re-establish control, to push the anomaly aside and get back to the business at hand. He waved a hand toward the auctioneer, a signal to continue. John Marsh did not move. He did not react to the threat. He simply replied, "The auction is not lawful. The public notice for this sale is defective. It lists First Fidelity Mutual as the primary lien holder with a clear title. The county records show that is not true. Therefore, you have failed to meet the legal requirements for a foreclosure sale." A man in the front row, one of the local farmers who had been bidding earlier, muttered something to his neighbour. The developer's man was now on his phone, speaking in a low, urgent voice. He was likely talking to his own legal counsel, relaying the unbelievable situation. He was no longer a confident buyer. He was a potential litigant in a title dispute.
The value of the property was plummeting with every word John Marsh spoke.
Davies saw his case and his client's money slipping away. He adjusted his suit jacket. He felt the eyes of the room on him. He was the expert, the man from the city, the one who was supposed to have all the answers. And he was being quietly dismantled by a man who looked like he had just come from mending a fence. He decided to try a second angle, an appeal to the overwhelming weight of the current debt. He lowered his voice, trying to create a bubble of reason around the two of them. He said, "Let's be realistic. We're talking about a $76,000 debt, a debt you admit you have not paid. You're trying to invalidate it over a $4 accounting error from the Carter administration. No judge in the world is going to take that seriously." It was a common tactic: belittle the opponent's position by framing it as absurd, reduce the principal to a ridiculous number.
John's response was immediate and calm. It was never $4. It was the principal. The bank failed to perform its fiduciary duty in 1996. It failed to properly file the release. It then failed in its due diligence in 2005, issuing a loan against a clouded title of its own making. Every action the bank has taken regarding this property since August of 1976 has been based on that first mistake. The $76,000 debt does not exist in a vacuum. It exists at the end of a chain of errors, and the first link in that chain is broken. The words were precise: fiduciary duty, due diligence, chain of errors. This was not the language of a desperate farmer. This was the language of someone who had done his homework. The quiet research in the courthouse, the long nights with his father's papers, had armed him. Davies was silent for a moment. The room was utterly still. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to have faded. He had one card left to play. The attorney, Davies, took a deep breath. He tried his third and final argument, the one lawyers use when the facts are against them: an appeal to common sense, to practicality. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimity, as if bringing a child back from a flight of fancy. He said, "Look, Mr. Marsh, let's find a way to solve this. We can postpone the sale. We can sit down next week. The bank is prepared to be reasonable. We can discuss a new payment plan, perhaps even a reduction of the principal amount to account for any past inconvenience. Let's not let a historical curiosity derail everyone's day. It was an offer of a settlement wrapped in the language of condescension. He was treating the core legal flaw as a mere inconvenience, a bargaining chip. He was trying to move the conversation away from the fatal defect in the title and back to the familiar ground of debt negotiation. He assumed John's goal was what everyone's goal was, to get a better deal, to save some money.
He had misjudged his man. John Marsh looked at Davies. His expression was unreadable. He did not seem angry. He did not seem triumphant. He seemed tired, but resolute. He said, "There is nothing to negotiate. The 2005 loan is void." He spoke the word with finality. Void. Not negotiable, not subject to a payment plan. It was a legal nullity. He then reached for the cardboard tube that had been sitting on the table, untouched. He unscrewed the cap. He slid out an old, rolled-up survey map. It was the original survey of the property from 1976, commissioned by his father. He spread it on the table next to the yellowed payment record. The map showed the 40 acres in sharp detail, the creek bed, the old oak tree on the western boundary, the fence lines his father had built by hand. He pointed to a section of the map. He said, "And there is another matter." He looked at the developer's representative who had just gotten off his phone. In 2008, the county widened the access road.
To do so, they claimed a 12-foot wide prescriptive easement along the northern edge of this property, but they based their claim on the 2005 title, the one held by the bank, a title that we now know was not clear. My father never granted that easement. The bank had no legal standing to grant it on his behalf. So the road itself is an encroachment. The developer's man went pale. His company had just spent millions building a subdivision that relied on that very access road. If the easement was invalid, his entire development was potentially landlocked. The problem had just grown from a single parcel of land to a multi-million-dollar infrastructure crisis. The stakes had been raised exponentially. John Marsh was not just challenging a foreclosure, he was challenging the very legality of the public road. The room had gone from quiet to dead silent. This was no longer about one man's debt.
It was about a cascade of legal consequences that reached far beyond the walls of this small room. The auctioneer looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Davies stared at the map, then back at John. The confidence had completely drained from his face. He saw now that he was not dealing with a man trying to save his farm. He was dealing with a man who had methodically uncovered 50 years of institutional carelessness. The county official who was present to oversee the auction, a quiet man named Peterson, had been watching the exchange without expression. He was a man in his late 60s with the kind of patient demeanor that comes from a lifetime of managing small-town disputes. He had seen everything, or so he thought. He finally spoke, his voice dry and calm. He said, "We need to verify the record." He nodded toward the back of the room. "Mrs. Gable, could you come forward?" A woman rose from a chair against the back wall. She had been sitting there the whole time, unnoticed. She was the senior county clerk, a position she had held for 38 years. She knew where every document was, and more importantly, where every document should be. She moved to the front table with a slow, deliberate walk. She did not look at Davies or John. Her focus was on the papers. She picked up the yellow document John had brought. She examined it, her fingers tracing the old typewriting. She then walked over to the official file cart that had been brought for the auction. She pulled the thick folder for Parcel 7B. She laid it open on the table. She began to compare documents, her eyes moving back and forth between John's paper and the bank's official filings. The room waited. No one spoke. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Mrs. Gable turned the pages. She was not hurrying. She was doing her job with the same methodical care she had applied for nearly 4 decades. She was the neutral verifier, the institutional memory of the county itself. Her word would be final. Davies watched her, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He had based his entire morning, his entire case, on the contents of that folder. He had trusted the paralegals and the title searchers at his firm to have done their job correctly. He had operated on the assumption of institutional competence. Now, he was watching that assumption be tested in real time by a woman who had likely forgotten more about property law than his paralegals had ever known. After several long minutes, Mrs. Gavel paused. She looked up, not at anyone in particular, but at the middle distance. She spoke one decisive sentence. The satisfaction of mortgage for the 1976 lien was never recorded. A pause. The lien is still active. That ended it. There was no argument left. The facts had been verified by the highest authority in the room.
The bank's legal position had not just been challenged, it had been vaporized. The foundation was gone. Everything built upon it, the 2005 loan, the foreclosure, the auction, was now legally baseless. The developer's man stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked over to Davies and spoke in a harsh whisper. "This is a material failure to disclose. We're pulling our bid. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Mrs. Gavel closed the file folder. The work was done. She returned to her chair at the back of the room, her part in the drama concluded. Peterson, the county official, looked at the auctioneer. He said, "The sale is cancelled." The energy drained out of the room. The remaining bidders, the farmers and neighbours, began to file out, talking in low murmurs. They cast glances at John Marsh, looks of awe and respect. He was one of them, a man of the land, and he had faced down the bank and won, not with shouting, but with a piece of paper and a quiet truth. Davies, the attorney, stood alone at the table. His briefcase was open, but he seemed to have forgotten what he was meant to be doing. He looked defeated. His confidence, so effortless just 20 minutes earlier, was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who has made a very public, very expensive mistake. He would have to call his superiors. He would have to explain how a $76,000 foreclosure was undone by a $4 error from 1976. He would have to explain the new, much larger legal threat from the developer regarding the invalid easement. His career had just taken a sharp, downward turn. He finally seemed to notice John, who was still standing there, patiently waiting. Davies cleared his throat. He made one last attempt to control the situation, to salvage something from the wreckage. He approached John, his tone now stripped of all arrogance. It was pleading. He said, "Mr. Marsh, the bank, we apologize for this oversight. We are prepared to do whatever it takes to make this right. We will file the satisfaction for the old loan immediately. We will formally declare the 2005 loan null and void. We will clear your title, at our expense, of course." He was offering a complete surrender. He just wanted it to be over. He wanted John to sign something, to agree to a settlement that would prevent any further legal action. He was trying to cap the damage. John listened. He nodded slowly. He understood the offer. He understood the fear behind it. But he did not accept. Not yet. He had one more condition. He said, "You will also draft a public notice to be filed with the county and published in the local paper, stating that the foreclosure was initiated in error due to a failure of the bank's internal record keeping, and you will send a formal letter of apology to my family for the distress caused." Davies stared at him. This was not about money. This was about accountability. A public admission of fault. It was humiliating. It was also non-negotiable. He knew, in that moment, that he had no choice.
Yes, of course, we will do that. John Marsh nodded again. That was all he needed. He turned to the table. He carefully folded his father's old survey map and slid it back into the cardboard tube. He screwed the cap on tightly. He then picked up the yellowed payment record, the small piece of paper that had changed everything. He folded it along its original creases and placed it back in his coat pocket. He turned to leave. He did not look at Davies again. He walked out of the courthouse annex room, his work boots making a soft, steady sound on the floor. He did not look back. The auction was over. The land was safe. Done. John didn't go straight home. He drove his old truck out to the property, the 40 acres along the creek. He parked by the gate and walked. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. The air was cool and clean. He walked the fence line, the same one his father had built 50 years ago. The posts were weathered cedar, grey and grooved by time, but still strong. He ran his hand over the rough wood of a corner post his father had set with his own hands. He remembered being a small boy, handing his father the tools, watching him work with a quiet, focused intensity. His father rarely spoke when he worked. He believed a man's character was revealed not in his words, but in the straightness of his fences and the sharpness of his tools. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. John looked out over the land. It wasn't majestic. It was just a simple piece of ground. A field of wild grass, a line of cottonwood trees along the creek, a small rise on the far end. But it was his. It was his father's. It was a place where the ledger was now balanced. The crooked line had been made straight. He felt a sense of peace, but not of victory. There was no joy in this, only a quiet rightness, a restoration of order. He had not defeated an enemy. He had corrected an error. He stayed there until the last light had faded from the sky, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the tall grass. He thought about his father's shoebox, filled with its meticulous records. It wasn't just a box of old papers. It was a testament to the idea that the small things matter, that a $4 mistake, ignored and forgotten by a powerful institution, could still hold the weight of truth. His father had planted something for the next man. He had left behind the tools, not just the hammers and saws in the workshop, but the more important tools. The patience to look, the integrity to check the math, and the quiet courage to state a simple fact in a room full of people who did not want to hear it. He walked back to his truck in the growing dark, the cardboard tube under his arm. The fight was over. Now the work could begin again. A story like this isn't just about a single late fee. It's about the power of a quiet, stubborn truth. Sometimes that truth is found in a courthouse ledger. Other times, it's hidden in plain sight, on a piece of paper everyone has overlooked for years. We'll meet a woman in Kentucky whose grandmother left her a small, failing farm, but tucked inside the old family Bible was a deed from 1890, a deed with a mineral rights clause that a very large coal company had been hoping no one would ever find. We'll see what holds. Stay with us.